Hi everyone, this is Elsa with another episode of Amazing Grace. Amazing Grace is a conversation with contemporary women leaders doing extraordinary things. And today with me, this afternoon at New Haven, Yale, I have the privilege of chatting with Emma Sky. Now, Emma Sky is our program director at the Yale World Fellows program. She's the senior fellow at the Jackson Institute, and she's such an inspirational woman. So we're going to learn a little bit about her. So welcome, Emma.
Thank you very much.
It's a little late for India, so we are doing this recording, but we are going to, it's a Facebook Live actually, but we are going to, promote it tomorrow when the Indian audiences can hear you. So with a little bit about Emma's background, she's an MBE and an OBE, which are two highest civilian awards by the British government. The Order of the British Empire, right?
Well, it's a little bit embarrassing when you say it that way. We're talking to India.
No, I think we love the British. We have this love-hate relationship with the British, but actually we, if you look at it, at the base of it, we have so many ties that we really love the British. Yeah. And she is a British expert on the Middle East, having worked in several of the countries, including Palestine, Jerusalem, and then for several years in Iraq. But she also did a stint in Afghanistan. And she served in Iraq as the political advisor to the US General Ray Odierno and as the governorate coordinator of Kirkuk for the Coalition Provisional Authority from 2003 to 2004. So before we launch in, I want to ask you my favorite question. What are your 3 adjectives that you would use to describe yourself?
I think I would use resilient, also adaptive. As for the third one, I wouldn't really use it myself, but other people often say I'm intimidating.
Actually I'm a little nervous doing this. For the first time, I think I'm nervous doing an interview.
You see, already I'm intimidating you. I don't mean to. It's just my manner, I think.
Yeah, the very composed face where you just look at people and they smile, and we are just wondering what's going on in your mind actually. So
it's accidental intimidation.
Yes. And I think it's worked well for you, right? Because you've had some pretty, adventurous stints in some of the most dangerous parts of the world, and you've survived. I think you've gotten out of it, not only with, just surviving, you've excelled. And we're going to learn a little bit about it. So, but to start off, in 2003, you volunteered. You put your hand up when the British government said, does anyone want to go to Iraq? And you said, yes, I want to go as a volunteer. And from what you told us, you actually wanted to go to Iraq to apologize to the Iraqi people. But once you landed up over there, you got shunted from Baghdad to Basra to Erbil, and then you ended up at Kirkuk as a governor of a province. So can you tell us a little bit about that journey? Because it's fascinating. It reads straight out of a Hollywood film.
Well, as you said, the British government needed people to administer Iraq after the fall of Saddam, and they sent out an email around the civil service. And I wasn't in the civil service, but I was in the British Council, so somebody forwarded it to me. And it just said, we need volunteers for 3 months to administer the country before we hand it over to the Iraqis. And, I've got a wealth of experience from working in Israel-Palestine, capacity building, people-to-people projects. So I thought, I will volunteer, I'll go out there for 3 months to help them, apologise to them for the war. Most people in Britain were against the war, and I thought this was a little bit that I could do. But before I left the UK, I didn't know what my job was going to be. They didn't tell me that. There was just a phone call from someone in London who said, find your way to Royal Air Force Base, Brighton Norton, get onto a military plane going to Basra, and when you arrive, you'll be met by somebody holding a sign with your name on it and taken to the nearest hotel. Well, it sounded plausible. It was the British government, and I assumed they knew what they were doing, so I followed the instructions. found my way to Bryce Norton, got on a military plane, and I arrived in Basra. And that's when the instructions broke down. Because I got off the plane, was looking around for that sign with my name on it, and there was no sign. There was nobody expecting me, and I think people thought, who's this woman among all these soldiers? And so after a day, I spent one night there, just sleeping in the airport on like the concrete in the corridor.
Mm-hmm.
So it was full of British soldiers all just stripped down to their underwear.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, well, I hadn't really I thought I was going to a hotel, so I wasn't really wearing appropriate underwear to strip down into, so I just stayed fully dressed, lying on the concrete like this, thinking this is going to be a very, very long night. And it was 50-degree heat, there was no air, it was just awful. But I didn't sleep, and the next day I thought, I'm going to Baghdad. So I found another plane that was going to Baghdad, and I got to Baghdad, and then I found my way down into what was called the Green Zone, and the Republican Palace, which was had been Saddam's palace, and it was taken over as the headquarters of the coalition.
Mm-hmm.
So I wandered in and said, hello, I'm Emma from England, come to volunteer. And I spent a week there, and I started, to learn all the things that coalition was trying to do. And they said, we've got enough people here, keep on going, try the north. So I went to Mosul, and they had somebody, and I kept going till I got to Kirkuk. And when I got to Kirkuk, they said, you are the senior civilian responsible for governing the province and reporting directly to Ambassador Paul Bremer, the head of the coalition. And I was like, oh my God, I've never been a mayor of a town in Britain, let alone, the governor of a province in someone else's country. So it was all kind of a little bit embarrassing.
Mm-hmm. Was it intimidating as well?
Well, of course it was intimidating. I mean, it was kind of, put in as a colonial administrator. People say, oh, you're British, you know how to do that. Well, it's been a long time since Brits did that kind of thing. And so we thought, well, what are you supposed to do? There's no handbook, there's no job description. And, in my first week, insurgents came to the house where I lived with rockets on their shoulders, and they fired 5 rockets into the house. And one came up into the bedroom where I was in bed. Unfortunately, it was a strong ceiling, so that took out the impact, but that did a lot of damage to the house, and I thought, I can't stay living here. I had bodyguards who were Gurkhas,
mm-hmm.
and the Gurkhas mutinied. They just said, we're not continuing to do this to protect you and this building, it's too dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
So I was left kind of like, oh. And that was just in my first week.
I often found, I had no experience similar to yours or anywhere close to yours, but whenever I found that I got a promotion or I was given a task where people above me had no clue what they were doing, I actually found that to be comforting so that I could navigate the way I wanted to. Did you feel similarly, like you were a governor now of a province, you had no prior experience, but you were there and you had to do the best that you could? So was that something that you felt that you could add value to the situation? Or, in many cases people would have said, it's too much, I'm going to give up and get back to Baghdad and get onto the next flight back.
Well, I told everybody I was going for 3 months. So even when I arrived and there was no one to meet me, some people say, why didn't you go back? I said, well, it's a bit embarrassing. So I get to Kirkuk, I'm now told I'm supposed to do this job. And what am I supposed to say? Sorry, I don't know how to do it? Of course I didn't know how to do it. I had no resources, I had very few staff. But I soon found out very early on that the real power in the province was the US military. There was an American brigade there which had 3,000 paratroopers.
Mm-hmm.
And they had resources, they had organization, they had bureaucracy. And at the beginning I was taking notes on everything they were doing wrong, threatening to take the brigade commander to The Hague if I found him in violation of the 4th Geneva Convention. And of course he thought, who is this woman always telling me what I'm doing wrong? And he believed initially that I was to be his replacement.
Oh. The
military in
there. You not only were going to be the British governor of the province, but also the US military replacement.
Not the military replacement. In the military, in their doctrine, they come in and they kind of, break
hand over
doors,
power. Oh, okay.
blow things up, and then they hand over to the civilians. And so when I arrived, they thought, oh, this is great. They thought I was the first of the civilians, and so they could start to draw down.
Oh my goodness.
But I wasn't the first. I was kind of like it. And so after a period of a few weeks getting to know each other and realizing that there weren't more people coming to help me, and the military wasn't withdrawing, we decided we would work together. We found out that we had a common objective, which was to get the province back up on its feet so the US military could withdraw. And the more I got to know them, I realized we had common values.
Yes.
And with a common objective and found common values, we worked out how to work together. And despite everything, it was probably the most fruitful working relationship I've ever had.
And that actually helped later on, where they reached out to you, even though you were a British, or you are a British citizen, to join the US military as a political advisor to one of the generals whilst in Iraq, right? So
yes, well, I didn't actually join the military.
You joined?
No, I didn't join.
You were the political advisor?
Yes, so still a civilian.
Okay.
But contracted by the military. Because the general had seen me working in Kirkuk with his brigade, and he kind of liked the fact that I kept telling them what they were doing wrong, and this sort of, if you like, a little bit of antagonism. And he said to me, you know, he didn't have anybody to push back on him to say that is stupid, and he didn't have a confidant. And he said, you know, this was now moving forward to 2007 when he was made the commander of forces in Iraq for the surge. He asked me to come and be his political advisor because he said, you've got a completely different perspective, and I want you to come with me wherever I go and, you know, to tell me what you think. Prepare me for meetings, debrief me afterwards. He just said, you see the world differently, and I need to understand that. And I think I found this really quite extraordinary, because I always tell you as a leader that you should surround yourself by people who are different. But leaders rarely do. They tend to surround themselves by people who think the same as them. But if you look at General Odieno and me, we're probably about the two most different people that you could imagine. And if it wasn't for this Iraq war, our lives would never have connected.
That's true. And, you know, that's true about the diversity aspect of it. You know, we always talk about diversity, but, you know, really being willing to have somebody in the room who can push back, give a counter argument, not agree all the time with your views, especially if, you know, the person's designation is a general in the US military. I think it takes courage. So on your 3, you should also add courage. And that's
Can I take off intimidating?
Yeah, I think you should remove intimidating and you should replace it with courage, because honestly, I cannot imagine there were too many women, you know, or even men putting up their hands voluntarily going into the Middle East, or rather Iraq, when this call was put out. I mean, you were one of how many, may I ask?
There weren't many, you're right.
Yeah, there weren't many. So not just
women,
but, you know, even men did not think it was, you know, something that they could possibly contribute to. And that takes a lot of courage. And especially going there where you know no one, and then ending up as governor of a province with no brief. It takes a lot of courage, resilience, and also adaptive behavior. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. Did you fear for your life? And if you did, what kind of precautions did you take?
You know, obviously getting, you know, being under attack in my first week, it made it, this is not a game, this really is real. So I was, you know, like anybody who serves in Iraq, I was in a number of incidents. My car hit a roadside bomb, rockets coming over. I mean, all these things were happening. And I think people react differently in those circumstances. You don't know how you're going to react unless you're in them. I had to believe that I wasn't going to die. I couldn't go out each day if I thought there's a bullet with my name on it. So I had to believe that. I also, when I was with the general, I felt safe because he was so large. He was larger than life.
Yeah, and on the cover of your book, you can see the difference in height as well.
Yes, I kind of think he's like twice my height.
Okay.
He's a lot taller than me. And he was larger than life, and I felt he can't die. It's impossible that he dies because he is leading this whole endeavor. So I knew the risk was there, but I also felt that if I die in Iraq, I die doing a job that I really love and surrounded by people on the left and being on the right of me who, you know, would take a bullet for me. So that camaraderie that really keeps you going in such circumstances.
That's powerful. I mean, to have somebody's, to know with full confidence that somebody else has your back. And these are people probably of not even the same nationality as you, yet you had confidence in them. They considered you part of their team as well. I think that's really powerful.
I think that's what happens in a war zone or in difficult circumstances when you're all thrown together.
Mm-hmm.
You need each other for survival.
Yes.
And so what nationality you are, that's irrelevant. You don't even have to like each other that much. But you are just, you are there together, in this together. And you'll see in many different circumstances, you read these things all the time. If a hand grenade is thrown in, a soldier will automatically dive on the hand grenade to save the life of his comrades. And being surrounded constantly by these American soldiers who were extraordinarily brave and prepared to sacrifice their life for each other. So that's something you only experience, I think, when you're at war.
Yes. And maybe it'll be great if we can figure out how to bring that sense of collaboration and camaraderie into peacetime.
Yes.
Because, at the end of the day, we all have something in common. We are all human beings. There's definitely one thing that connects all of us, but we tend to forget it. And the differences are always highlighted. So what do you think? Will we ever have peace in the Middle East? And what continues to draw you to the Middle East?
I love the Middle East. I've loved it since I first set foot in the region when I was 18. I think there's things there that we don't have in the West. So the interconnectedness between people, the hospitality, the warmth, the generosity. So the Middle East has amazing people, but it doesn't have good governance. And I think this is always the dilemma. When the Arab Spring broke out, I thought at last something really positive is happening to the region. And I was really optimistic. And I went out thinking this is, there's going to be peace from here on out because the push for change is coming from within. But it didn't work out that way. Regimes either clung on to power or they collapsed and brought about civil war. And you think, what is it about the Middle East? What's wrong with the Middle East? Why is it trapped in this cycle of violence and authoritarianism? I see the violence, I see things such as ISIS, Daesh, as symptoms of a problem. The problem really being the state, the poisonous politics, the weakness of the state. And why is that? I think some of it is due to the economy in the Middle East. It's often based on oil or aid, so you don't have people paying taxes to their government. So it's this sort of rentier state where the regimes are not accountable and they're not transparent. And part of it is to do with the relationship between the West and the Middle East. There's always been this, we buy your oil, we sell you weapons, that sort of relationship. So it's a number of factors. And I think these countries going through these revolutions at the time of the information age, where everything is being tweeted, it's on YouTube, it made it very, very hard for these transitions to happen. And, it's really tragic to watch those hopes of those young people when they went out into the streets and they called for justice and transparency, to see those hopes be crushed and to see governments again become more authoritarian. But this is not going to bring about long-term stability unless governments try and address the grievances of the people, unless they provide more opportunities, more jobs, more transparent government. Young people are going to protest again. So, the governments have a time where they can reform, because if they don't, I think there'll be a new cycle of protests down the road.
Yeah. That's true. And for those of you who want to learn more about Emma's views, she has written a book already published. It's called The Unraveling: High Hopes and Missed Opportunities in Iraq. And she's going to come up with a second book. So this is the book. And if you look closely, I'll try and get this closer. That's the general, who's double her size.
And that's little me.
And her second book is going to come out in February.
Yes.
In February next year. So don't miss it, because she teaches this class at Yale. She teaches on the Middle East at Yale. But that's where Tintin, one of our World Fellows, actually had a question. And she said, how did you make the transition from being on the field to academics at Yale? It's such an interesting transition, and we're all kind of envying your role.
It wasn't an intentional transition. So I came back to London in September 2010. I get back to London and I have no job, no income, and everything I've ever worked on has really ended in tragedy and disaster.
That must be really, depressing.
It was very depressing because, when you're a civilian coming back from war, there's no band, there's no organisation you fit back into. And it's not like America, when people don't really follow these things closely and they just say thank you for your service. In Britain, you really feel the outcome of the Iraq War. You can see the refugees flooding into Europe. Tony Blair would have gone down as one of Britain's finest prime ministers, and yet his whole reputation has been tarnished by this war. So I come back to London. I've been the longest serving Brit in this war, and I come back and I'm not in any organisation, because I left the British Council to go and work
as a volunteer initially, ended up as a governor.
Well, yeah, left them at the British Council, and I was now didn't have an employer. So it was really difficult. But I had to testify before the Iraq inquiry into the war, and one of my interrogators there was Sir Lawrence Freedman. And at the end of the interrogation, he kind of walked over to me and said, actually, you know quite a lot about what went wrong, what happened, you kind of understand Iraq. Come and teach at King's College London. And so after a year of not really working, I started teaching at King's. And at Yale, there is General McChrystal teaching here. And General McChrystal asked, would I come and give a few lectures on the Arab Spring on his course? So I flew over to Yale, gave 2 lectures, and they said, will you come and teach here? And I thought, I'd come back with no job at all.
and now you're in demand.
Yes, now people actually want me, which is quite nice. And was asked to come teach at Yale.
Great.
And so I never thought of being in academia.
And then how did you end up being a director of this program, the World Fellows program? And thank you so much, because I really enjoy and I'm grateful to be a Yale World Fellow.
Well, thank you. A hand came on my shoulder and they said, will you be the director of Yale World Fellows? I just thought, this, seriously, I didn't, there was no application as such. It was just the hand on the shoulder. And they said,
this is similar to being given the governorship of Kokok.
Right place at right time. They said, you're like a World Fellow. You could be a World Fellow. So how about leading that group?
Yeah.
And so that's how I came to be director of the World Fellows program.
So a lot of people have been asking me about this fellowship. They've been watching my journey very closely on social media. So as the director of the program, what are you looking for in a World Fellow?
I'm looking for someone who is passionate about making a difference in the world. That is, let's say, globally minded, locally active. That's somebody who wants to be part of something bigger than self. somebody who cares deeply, and it's not just about talking about the problems, it's having ideas for how to go and solve those problems. So I'm looking at people who are extraordinary, who are change makers, and they're on the way up. This is not a retirement program. This is for someone who's doing really well, and we want to give them this opportunity to help them get to the next stage.
Yes. And truly it is, a great program for us to come here, reflect on our journeys thus far, and then think about how we can scale up our work, or, change tracks if possible, or even think bolder in many ways. There's so many opportunities for collaboration with the other World Fellows who are all doing amazing things. They're amazing leaders in their own right, and using Yale resources as well. So thank you very much. That's, this is an amazing, amazing program. So
well, you are making really good use of it. It provides people with the opportunity. We get thousands of applicants and we choose 16 out of a big field. But it provides people such as yourself the opportunity to reflect, and as you said, to collaborate, to scale. But you're also a great inspiration to the students here. A lot of the students here, they're thinking they're going to go into banking or consulting, and because their parents are. And yet, when they hang out with World Fellows, their world goes like this. And you and your fellow fellows really inspire our students to go, be brave, be bold, take risks, because individuals matter. Individuals really can make a change in the world. So you bring a lot to our students, and these students who follow you around here, they're going to be following you for life. When you're in the old people's home, they're going to be there visiting you.
I hope so. But yeah, I'm happy to inspire Yale students. And this is a very interesting time in the world, and you being an observer and an active participant in a lot of government decisions, not directly, but through your work in Iraq, the Middle East, and elsewhere. What do you think of the current mood right now of yesterday's midterm elections? And then I also want to ask you about Brexit. Will it happen or not happen? What do you think? I think this is a fascinating time, and maybe 20 years from now we'll look back and maybe, I'm sure there'll be thousands of books written, but it's going to shape our lives for the future.
So we live in this very interesting time, and I think we're seeing an old order ending, and we don't know yet what the new order is going to be. There's a quote by Gramsci that says, the old world is dying, the new world struggles to be born, we live in a time of monsters. And that's really how it feels. And I remember when I was an undergrad, I was a student at Oxford, and during that time the Cold War came to an end, the Berlin Wall came down, Mandela was released from jail, apartheid was abolished, the Middle East peace process began, and it looked like liberal democracy from here on out. All the problems of the world were going to be solved. And look at the 1990s. Civil wars came to an end. We had an activist UN Security Council. We had peacekeeping forces sent out by their countries to help bring peace. And that era has ended. And I think when we look at it, we will see not 9/11 itself, but how America responded to 9/11. Because the country that helped establish this world order and led this world order undermined the very rules through the way it responded. So you can look at targeted assassinations, invasion of Iraq, kidnapping people in one country, renditioning them to another, torture, Guantanamo Bay, Abu Ghraib. There's a list of these things. And America was so terrified that there was going to be another attack, it started going after terrorists everywhere. And the number of bad guys in the world proliferated. So it went from the hundreds to the tens of thousands. And I think we'll look back and we'll see the Iraq War was the catalyst, if you like, for the end of this sense of an international community. And the failure to stop the bloodshed in Syria is the evidence of this. And so in the West, you can see people have lost faith in the establishment. They've lost faith in elites, their ability to make the right decision. I'll say elites got us into the Iraq War. Look at the financial crisis. Millions of people lost their homes. No bankers went to jail. The government bailed the bankers out. And with the lack of leaders, the lack of policies, the lack of institutions dealing adequately with the concerns that people have, they've moved towards populism, and people are prepared to support anybody who says, they can rescue them, they'll deal with their concerns, they'll stop immigration, that they'll bring sovereignty back. So it is a strange time. And I look at Donald Trump, Brexit, as not the root cause of problems. I see them as a symptom, a response to the failure of elites over the last 10, 15 years, probably longer in fact.
If President Trump calls you and says, Emma, I need you to be my advisor on the Middle East, would you go? I'm putting you on the spot over here.
It's a really difficult question to ask because, I'm not American. If my own country said to me, if the Prime Minister phoned up and said, will you serve, then I think the right thing to do is to serve. But it's difficult at the moment in America because I think President Trump, he has particular attitudes and particular leadership styles which are offensive. And the difficulty, if you're asked to serve such a person, is can you moderate him or do you end up enabling him?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's something that people have to think through. It really depends at what level that you're working at. If you're able to get into the inner circle, then you can moderate. But if you're down the food chain, you might be an enabler of policies which you really feel go against your morality and sometimes what is legal. So it's a difficult situation.
That's true. Well, Emma, you are truly inspirational. I am so lucky that I got to meet you in person and be part of this program. And for all the young people, especially the young girls out there, what is the inspirational message you have for them?
Elsa, it's fantastic having you here. And you and yourself and how you live your life are an inspiration to them. So when I look at young people, particularly young women, I urge them to take risks. Be bold, be brave. There is nothing wrong with failure. You learn from failure. I have had so many failures in my life, and what has made me resilient is getting back up. You learn from that and you move forward. If you're too scared of failure that you won't try, you'll always live your life regretting the things that you didn't try. So be bold, be brave, don't be scared to fail.
Thank you. Those are indeed very wise words from a very wise woman. Thank you so much, Emma.
Well, thank you.
And don't forget, go to Amazon.com and buy her book, Unraveling. You will find a lot on Iraq and the Middle East, but also watch out for her next book in February. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.